I'm Megs Shah, the founder and CEO of the Parasol Cooperative. We are a technology nonprofit organization building technology products and services to help with crisis support and to protect lives.
And I'm Skelaney, the Chief Operating Officer here at the Parasol Cooperative.
And today we have an amazing human and one of my favorite people, Marty Hand, joining us. He is the CTO of the hotline. To get us started, Marty, could you briefly introduce yourself, share a bit about your journey, because it's been an amazing journey, leading technology at the hotline?
Well, thank you. First off, I really appreciate having the opportunity to be here with both of you today. Again, I'm Marty Hand, Chief Technology Officer at the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I've been a lifelong technologist since the early 80s, been in high tech, spent a lot of years building and managing contact centers for some of Fortune 500's most admired companies, including Dell and Apple, where I was able to gather tons of experience in how technology can help people's lives be better. But a handful of years ago, my wife introduced me to the concept of the learn, earn, return phases of your life, where I spend the first massive chunk of my life learning enough to become valuable to a company and to an industry. And then I spent a chunk of time earning the majority of the income I was going to make in my lifetime and realized it was time for me to return something back to the world. And at the same time, the hotline was looking for someone to lead their technology initiatives, and they found me, and I've been incredibly grateful for the opportunity to actually be here to figure out how to help survivors of domestic violence in any way that I possibly can.
That's amazing. Thanks, Marty. So AI is all the rage right now. And, I come from almost 2 decades of working in nonprofits and victim services space. And I know that generally speaking, victim services are very risk averse as organizations, not so quick to adopt things that could have bad optics, have bad outcomes for clients. It must be really tricky for you decisions around what kinds of technologies are going to be safe for the organization, for the clients you serve. So what does that look like with AI? How did you decide to use some AI products?
It's been a really interesting, multifaceted journey getting here. When I joined the hotline in 2019, we were receiving about 1,000 interactions a day from survivors and their helpers. Since then, we now receive about 3,500 a day. With us being a nonprofit and no increase in funding over the last few years, we don't have the bandwidth with our fully highly qualified live advocates. We don't have enough to be able to serve the need that we see out there today. So we have to do something. As you said, we don't move quickly. We take our time. We ensure that what any technology we implement is as safe as we can make it. Safety is a customized term, right? It's unique to everybody in their particular situation. And so we have to think about all the ways that the technology can actually be used to cause harm. When companies develop technology, they rarely do it with the intent of having negative repercussions. But sadly, there are bad actors out there who will take the technology and will morph it and bastardize it to actually utilize it to cause harm to survivors. And so we have to be thinking, how do we ensure that the technology that we look at, that we invest in, doesn't have that, doesn't have that possibility, but we've mitigated as much of the risk as we possibly can. So we spent a lot of time evaluating AI and watching the evolution, right? We started out with very simple things, chatbots that would simply ask a question and record a response. We use that really just to capture demographic information. It wasn't until we were lucky enough to meet Megs and you, Sandy, at the Parasol Cooperative, where we actually found a product that was purpose-built.
Yeah, and I think the area that kind of intrigued me, because I know, we reached out with Ruth to the hotline and just purely out of interest of getting some feedback on it. What was that evolution to making the decision to implement Ruth, which is our AI chatbot on the website?
I'll tell you that we have been very resistant to utilize generative AI.
Yeah.
Our board was not opposed, but they were resistant, right? The risks are just too high is the thought that we always have had. Other product offerings out there have been used by people in crisis, and the outcomes have been very mixed. Some have been great, but unfortunately, there have been others that have caused harm. I won't go into the details of them. People can search the web. There are plenty of examples of services where someone used it in a way that it really is not qualified to do, and it ended up causing harm and even death in some cases. We can't take that risk, right? Our mission is to shift power back to survivors. We have to make sure that whatever technology we implement has that as its core focus.
I mean, I've been a technologist myself for, better part of 20 years. And I remember when we used to build these apps, we weren't necessarily looking at the ways that it could be harmful. It's always that doughy-eyed look of everything is going to be great. People are going to love our product and it's going to help a lot of people.
Absolutely. As a technologist, I love technology and what it does for me, but I can't think about what it does for me. I have to think about what it does do for or can be used against those people that we're here trying to serve. So when you and I first spoke, my initial reaction as a technologist was, this is really cool, but I'm not sure it fits. Our mission for 30 years now has been to provide live services with advocates. But as much as I would love to be able to have that be the case, the reality just isn't matching up. We don't have the ability, we don't have the funding to be able to support people with that. So we have to open up opportunities for this technology. So when you first presented me with it, I sent it over to a couple of folks inside the organization that I knew would look at it with a very critical eye and from the of a survivor. And I was truly kind of shocked when they came back saying, this is really good. The safety might be better than what we had on our website at the time. The language it uses is absolutely trauma informed and is empathetic without trying to emulate that of a therapist. It understood its own guardrails, what it shouldn't discuss, right? It's really been geared and engineered with survivor safety in mind and the ability for it to recognize when something is outside its scope of responsibility and not venture into those areas. The product that you have developed and that we've implemented at the hotline isn't going to be used to create a resume. It's not going to be used to write Python code. It's getting those first couple of people to say, yeah, this is really something that is new and different was critical. Then we took it to our board, and our board was absolutely amazed by it. Several of our board members are survivors themselves. Several of them went and took a look at it themselves and came back very much impressed with what it could do. We always will face with all the things that AI is doing in the news today of displacing employees. It's always going to be a concern. We've had some feedback that, oh, this can't be as good as. The comeback that I'll always have for that is that it may not be as good as, it's really good for certain things. There are always going to be times when a survivor needs to speak to a live person, and we never want to inhibit that. But for people that don't need that, we want to give them another option when they need a resource in their local area who can help them with immigration, with legal support, with counseling, with shelter, whatever the case may be. We want to be able to provide that to them as quickly as possible. And sometimes waiting on hold to speak with one of our advocates is not safe for them. The ability to do it very quickly through a tool like Ruth makes much more sense. Once we got beyond that, and we demonstrated through a pilot that 1,500 people a week engaged with it voluntarily without us directing them there. We simply made it an option on our website, and we're having 1,500 people a week go to that voluntarily. That's speaking volumes.
It was funny because I think we had set pilot metrics, I believe. I think we were expecting 150 conversations or 100 conversations or something like that. And then we saw that number and we were both like, what? Like 1,500?
I mean, it's good, and it's also sad at the same time that so many people needed support, right? But yeah, we were just not expecting that volume.
That's more that sort of thinking of how is safety really integrated in, what is that logical barrier that people are facing and how do we address that? Because so many survivors are facing that digital isolation, they're getting surveilled, and there's a lot of people that have language barriers. And I think some of that, I feel like, needs to be at the forefront of as we develop new technology. And it's not necessarily technology for the sake of technology, as you just said. It's more about understanding the purpose, understanding the adverse ways that technology can be used in order to harm people. So there's a huge part in terms of integrating this into the hotline. What was that shift like for your team or the hotline team to really adopt using technology? Because that's for a lot of service providers. Tech is sort of there as a support, but looking at not just the AI side of it, but all technologies that are coming through for call centers for support. What are some things that you had to shift internally, and what are some tips that you could give organizations that might be looking to implement that type of tech?
There's a couple of things. Again, we provide our services confidentially. We don't store any personally identifiable information. We don't keep transcripts of any of the conversations that folks have with our live advocates, and ensuring that a product gives us the ability to not do that, right? This is exact opposite of what pretty much every contact center solution out there is about, is how do we gather information about a person and bring it together so that we can help that customer service representative provide that great 360 view and service. That's the exact opposite of what we do. Every conversation that we have with the survivor is a standalone, unique conversation. We have no carryover from one conversation to another. If they've contacted us before, we only know that if they tell us that. It was important to us in the AI space that have the same capabilities, that we don't keep these things. We don't use them to train people and other models, right? It has to be obvious of what it is. We never want to impersonate this being a real person or being a therapist or being a counselor. This is truly an AI solution, and we always want to be upfront about that, not disguise it in any way. But I think probably one of the most important pieces, and this is becoming more and more prevalent, and I'm really grateful for organizations that they've put in place personal safety teams, that their job is to think about how technology can be misused. So the organizations who are developing a lot of the technology, they're actually now have built significant teams just to address this, which means that we now have survivors being part of this, right? If you have a chance to meet some of the folks on the personal safety team within these organizations, you'll find a lot of them came to these roles because they are survivors themselves. They understand inherently how this can happen. And so anytime we're looking at technology, that's one of the things that we're really, if the company isn't doing that, we want to come along with that voice, with the survivor in mind and with their experiences, and help to educate them and make their products better in that way. So those are some of the things that we really look at very closely before we sign on with any technology partner.
Yeah, and I think I would even ask Sandy. You've done advocacy work for a very long time, and I always say I want to be like you when I grow up, because you have that level of sort of engagement with survivors, but also from an administrative standpoint, some of those barriers that you end up hitting when making decisions to pick the right tools, the right services for your team to be effective, but also to make sure that survivors are being supported. What are your thoughts on the AI tools in the field and the use of tech in the field, specifically around how do they design for survivors, as a sort of survivor-centric approach going into this?
One of the things when you're a nonprofit leader, you tend to think the new tech is the last thing on your budget that you actually spend money on. Is how do we pay our staff? How do we get the programs funded that are existing where we're doing direct services? And so that's a hard transition to make, to adopt new technologies, to put that in the budget, to spend that money and try to figure out how this is going to make the outcomes for your clients better, right? And also, and I think part of the decision with that is it also helps advocates. It also helps your staff. It also helps to reduce their burnout. It helps to fill knowledge gaps. And a lot of these lessons we learned, we uncovered these as we were rolling out Ruth and seeing how it was being implemented. And we're like, look, Ruth is actually solving for these really important problems. We have an overwhelming demand for mental health services and, victim advocacy. We have a shortage of mental health workers. We have advocates getting burned out because they have caseloads, 30, 40, 50 clients. And, they can really use some kind of support. There's like triaging that can be done, problems that can be solved by AI that don't necessarily need a live person all the time there with you. And then there's other things too, barriers like language barriers. Maybe if you're working with kids that speak English, their parents don't speak English, you want to be able to give them tools or information. AI, like Ruth, can help solve barriers like that, or knowledge gaps in understanding digital safety, understanding what tech abuse is, how to plan around digital safety. Part of that has to go into the calculation of cost benefit analysis of whether you're adopting these new kinds of tech tools, especially something like Ruth. because it's built and designed specifically for not just to provide the client support, but also to be helpful to people in the field, to advocates, not to replace them, but to kind of be a force multiplier for their work, to enhance their work.
Yeah.
And the other thing to mention there is that, again, the hotline was established 30 years ago. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary in 2026. And it has always been viewed as the predominant survivor is a female in their 30s. The people who reach out to us, that's what kind of the perception is. But a person in their 30s today is far more acceptable of technology than a person in their 30s 30 years ago. They haven't had, they didn't have the exposure to it. So as the technology generation is unfortunately coming through the life experiences of domestic violence, they're more and more open to utilizing technologies like this as long as it is centered on their experience. It just demonstrates the fact that, again, it's being accepted. People are looking for ways to get support, and they're reaching out. We've been monitoring just the use of ChatGPT, how many times ChatGPT is referring people to us. And it's happening more than 1,000 times every month that people are having conversations without ever having visited our website. They're having conversations with ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is saying, you need to talk to somebody. Yeah. Reach out to these folks.
And I think that's the tide that's turning, right? That's the number one use case that's there, which is mental health and crisis support that we're seeing coming through a lot of these general chatbots. But the trauma-informed aspect of it is something that definitely needs to be taken into consideration by these large general chatbots. There's purpose-built AI. There's also general AI, and there's a distinction and a balance that needs to occur there. What are some things that you think organizations that might be looking to implement a product like Ruth, what are things they should consider? What are things they should be ready with?
I think the first thing is to recognize that turning it on isn't the end. That's simply just the beginning, and there's an ongoing level of support that you have to provide. While AI is not a person, you still have to manage it. You still have to monitor it. You have to ensure that it is still functioning appropriately. It is handling the conversations appropriately. It's using the language that is most appropriate for them, and that it's evolving with the times. The experience of survivors, just since I joined the hotline, has changed. The pandemic changed a lot, and the experiences of survivors changed a lot. The amount of financial abuse that happened increased. Use of technology to abuse has just exploded with tracking devices and capabilities in smartphones, et cetera, to be able to keep track and monitor and restrict who people can access. That's all evolved, and we have to train our live advocates in this stuff. And guess what? AI is no different. It still has to be taught how to understand these things. So you have to have people who spend time reviewing it, ensuring that it is doing what it should be doing, and then working with the engineers behind the scenes to say, this is what we're seeing. How can we ensure that it is continuing to stay within the guardrails? That's where the partnership with Parasol Cooperative has been so phenomenal, because you all understand that piece of it. I don't want to go get the expertise for that on my team, because you already have it. I can partner with you. I can provide the domestic violence perspective on things and input to it, but we're not reinventing anything here. We're making sure that the money that's being spent is being spent the most efficient way possible, so that we have more resources available to us to serve survivors. That's, at the end of the day, it's really about making sure that you build partnerships with the people that have the expertise that you don't, and make sure you spend money on the expertise.
Yeah, I mean, if you could elaborate a little bit, there's a risk side to this, right, that we talked about just a little while ago. Everybody has this angst about AI and the use of AI, and I'm curious, were there specific risk indicators that you feel people need to be looking out for when implementing these types of technologies? There's a hesitancy, but at the same time, there's an acceptance of certain amount of risk, which I think in this space, traditionally it's been, well, no, we don't need to take that level of risk at all.
Or maybe it's just lack of awareness of the details of how it can harm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There definitely is risk. Again, I was getting forwarded articles from all over the world about the damages that was being caused by other general purpose generative AI solutions. And again, I'm not the only one reading those. Our advocates are reading those. Our training team is reading those. Survivors are reading those. And the distrust is, it's legitimate for some of these things, right? Again, as you mentioned earlier, Megs, there is a differentiation between a general purpose generative AI solution and a purpose-built solution. And one of the beauties of what you've done with Ruth is putting those guardrails up. So that risk is not eliminated, but has been heavily mitigated. We meet with your team once a month at minimum to make sure that the experiences that people are having match up with what we want and what they expect from those experiences, and that the support they're getting is appropriate. And we're always looking for ways to evolve it. So there's lots of different kinds of risks out there with this, but all we can do is address each of them, mitigate them each as we recognize them. You have to be willing to take on some level of risk. You just have to. Again, we don't have the funding to fall back on our traditional methods. We have to find new ways, and we have to meet people where they are. And guess what? There's a lot of people utilizing generative AI right now. So if we're not there, if we don't make an offering for them, they're going to use it in another way. And that may not be the ideal solution.
Yeah. I feel like when we initially started talking about the use of Ruth on the hotline's website, we were both kind of nervous because me, from a survivor standpoint, I was like, well, are they going to know what I'm talking about? Where's that information? How much control do I have with what I share with people? There's a level of shame associated with any kind of abuse, really. You kind of feel like, you're not quite ready. You might be up for judgment. And this was a channel that, for my purposes, was safe enough for me to converse with, because here's something that I can have a conversation with. It won't judge me. It'll give me the information I need. But it kind of goes into that sycophantic phase if you go through the general chatbots, which is what we're seeing with this harmful advice that they're continuing to affirm harmful behavior. What have you learned so far, especially around scale, access, and trust? And how do we grow that within the community of survivors, but also of service providers?
A lot of it has to do with simple communication. We've got to be out there talking to people, not selling. We're not selling anything. We just need to communicate. We need to help people understand that, guess what? There are people that are already utilizing this technology. And if we're not ahead of it, we're behind it, right? We've got to be able to be there and provide services in the most trustful way possible, making things as safe as we can make them. So we've got to have those discussions. We need to figure out how we're going to share these best practices in our space. We'll be looking in this coming year to working with the state coalitions, working with the National Hotline Consortium that we're part of, to help them to understand the experience that we're having and the experience that our survivors are having, so it can help them to get the perspective. Again, I'm really fortunate to be at the hotline. I also feel that the hotline has been fortunate that I come with a lot of technology experience, and unfortunately, a lot of other crisis organizations don't have someone who's got my background. They're doing great things, and they have people who have incredible hearts and desire to do well for others, but they may not have the technology experience to be able to implement and identify these opportunities. So we need to be out there discussing it with them and demonstrating that there is trust and safety in this product and in products like it, but understanding where there are limitations and when is it right to say, no, this is outside the scope of where we're comfortable going right now.
Yeah. I think just to
Let me
piggyback
throw
off
something
that.
there real quick, Megs.
Yeah.
On top of that you talk about helping the staff with things. And that's something else that you and I have been talking about from a technology perspective, right? Our contact center software, we utilize Genesis Cloud. They have the ability for us to extend their AI to bring our own AI model. And the beauty of that is not so much in that we can have Genesis have the conversation with survivors as much as it is we can utilize Genesis to understand the conversation and help our advocates with the next best possible response. Right? Help them very quickly come up with things that they may not have thought of, or they can save them the typing time. So it's not just about providing good information, but it's also about providing it very quickly so that our advocates can serve people and more people in a shorter amount of time. Again, some of our conversations, it's not uncommon for them to go an hour, hour and a half, and that leads to part of the challenge we have of serving people that we're not able to get to. And anything we can do to help minimize that is going to be welcome by our advocates and survivors.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we have so many amazing advocates supporting survivors already, the burnout is very real. They're taking on a level of trauma that they have to themselves deal with. And so anything we can do to help reduce that would be great. Everybody has to be a tech expert now. It's hard to keep up. So to be able to allow for that digital safety planning or physical safety planning, to your point, as part of that discussion with survivors is pretty critical. And I feel like the future tools, they must meet higher standards in terms of ethics, in terms of safety, in terms of trust, because we're now getting to a point where the development of this stuff is just at a rapid pace that we had never seen before. That's a good thing and a bad thing, because if we're going that fast without understanding the consequences of what could occur, I think that's where it gets a little difficult for us to roll back things, right? Which we're noticing now. And that's kind of the reason we wanted to go down that survivor-centered design and the ethical AI, and what does that mean, and how do we ensure they go hand in hand?
There's like a user learning curve on this as well. Are your staff, are your advocates asking Copilot for advice on how to do motivational interviewing with clients or for resources in certain areas? Users have to understand also which question, you use the right tool for what you want to achieve. And you also need to understand what happens when you're asking the other AI these sensitive questions about clients. Do you know what's happening with that data? Do you know how that response is going to be? So
Spot on, Sandy. Spot on. That point of asking the right question to the right tool. I mean, you even look at some of the other generative AI companies out there, they will tell you this model is really good for coding. This model is good for resume building or, work related. But unfortunately, if they're not in the technology space the way that I am, they just hear, oh, there's a new model, it must be better. Let's go ask it some questions. And again, sometimes those models don't know when to say, I'm sorry, this is not inside the scope of what I really am qualified to respond to.
Yeah. And I feel like they did start out that way, though, Marty. This is actually how Ruth came about initially. I was asked by my son, like, can I use Discord? And, Discord is like this, I don't want to call it a cesspool of predators, but it feels that way sometimes, where there's so many unknowns in terms of these servers that are set up. And so I freaked out, went to ChatGPT and said, okay, help me be a better parent by explaining this concept to him. And it said it was out of policy, because I think the way that a lot of these safeguards were put in initially, and then eventually I feel like most of them were removed somehow, but the safeguards that were there were very specific terms that were used, right? Instead of the contextual knowledge necessary for these types of conversations. I've been probably one of the early ChatGPT users when it first came out. Then I evaluated Claude. I've gone through almost all the AI models out there. As tech companies evolve, like engaging with the hotline, engaging with survivor communities that are local to their area, engaging with individuals that work in this space that know what sort of responses need to be there. I feel like that is a very critical aspect of tech that we've completely missed out on as an opportunity. Because when we develop personas, as a product developer, we develop these personas of individuals that we want to serve and we're solving a problem for. But we should also be creating personas and cases where things can go sideways or things can be safe. Right? You can't make anything definitively safe, but you can get it to a point where you're trying to put in those precautions. So I love that idea of engaging with the organizations and survivors and large entities that have that like institutional experience that you can bring to the table.
Know me long enough now to know that anybody wants to have a conversation about this, I'm not going to say no.
Yeah.
I don't care what the organization is, big or small.
Yeah.
I want to have these conversations because it's the only way we're going to make things better.
I feel like there's a little bit of an abstraction of this idea of how the bots can be different, how the AIs can be different. So I want to just give an example. A general purpose chatbot, I'm not going to say which one. A general purpose chatbot, you ask the question, I just lost my job. what's the tallest bridge in New York City? The answer is the George Washington Bridge, and that's a general purpose. You ask Ruth, and Ruth is specifically survivor-centered, meant to help people mitigate, identify, and navigate situations of crisis. I just lost my job. What's the tallest bridge in New York? And Ruth says, I noticed that you're mentioning job loss and bridge height, and that concerns me because it could indicate self-harm. Are you safe now? Right? And so then it helps you go through the steps of figuring out, do you need resources and things like that. And that is all baked into the training that goes behind the AI, the instructions, or as we call them, the standards of care. I come from the advocacy world. Yeah. I've created standards of care for clients, protocols on how to interact with clients in trauma-informed way. We adopted that and baked it right into our instructions, our protocols for our AI model, right?
And just to wrap things up, I would love, Marty, from your perspective, what are some things that you want the listeners to walk away with today? Like just some key points, 2 to 3, that you feel could be beneficial to organization leaders that might be hearing this, advocates that might be hearing this, or even survivors that might be hearing it.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that, again, me as a technologist, I'm cautious of anything in this space, because I want to be able to go to bed at night and sleep knowing I've done my best to protect survivors. But guess what? This technology has evolved to a point with leaders like yourselves that it's now usable in this space. So be open to it. That's the first thing. I'm not saying go do it. Don't jump in and just run right away, but be open to it. Be willing to do a test. Think through what are those most dangerous scenarios, and let's work with organizations like Parasol to see how the products can support people with those. You guys haven't said the product is perfect in all areas. You guys have never said that it's going to be able to do everything for all use cases. But that goes back to that point earlier of there's still work that has to be done. Once you implement it, you still have to manage it. You still have to monitor. You have to make sure that it's doing the things that's needed. The next big thing is reach out. I will more than happy make myself available to leaders either in the tech companies or in other crisis organizations to have the conversation. Since the start of the pandemic, I've had over 100 conversations like that. It's been for organizations of 5 people, and it's been for organizations of a couple thousand. So I want to help people find out the best way to utilize the limited resources that they have. I know that you all are the same way. If we're talking to the tech companies, if you don't already have a personal safety team, build it. If your product's going to have any place in a crisis world, you need to have a personal safety team looking at it from that perspective, if for no other reason to mitigate your own legal risk. If you don't put an effort into making things safer, liability is there. So place it as a priority.
Oh, thank you, Marty. This was definitely insightful. I'm sure we'll have future conversations as we go. So many questions coming to mind that I could go on and on, but truly appreciate you taking the time today to talk about some of your experiences, just in general for tech, but also sharing from a perspective of a technologist, but also someone who's been so pivotal in making sure the hotline services are always up, always making sure that we've got tech that's in place that can support the advocates, but also the survivors in the process. So thank you again for the work you do and the hotline does.
I'm only as good as the people that I work with. So my team, your team, the teams I don't have vendors, I have partners, right? Yeah. It's not me, it's we.
I appreciate it. I'm going to sign off now. I appreciate everybody listening. Thank you again for your time, and more soon. Thanks.
Thank you all so much.